Hi, I'm Rick Van Ness. You're watching the 10 Rules of Common Sense Investing for Lifelong Happiness. These rules help you answer two big questions: how much to save and how much risk to take. In the first two episodes, we took an initial look at developing a plan and your most important habit, saving for your goals. In both these episodes, we looked at the risk of inflation and introduced ways of hedging that risk with I-bonds and TIPS bonds. Deciding how to control your risk is your most important decision and a prerequisite for choosing what type of investment assets to own. In this episode, we'll look at investment risk and return. We'll discuss what is risk, how risky are stocks, how risky are bonds, and techniques to reduce risk. Here's a chart I like. At a glance, you can compare the total returns for stocks and bonds. Risk and return go hand in hand. Since the return for stocks is much higher than the return for bonds, we can confidently expect that the risk of owning stocks is also much higher than the risk of owning bonds. Precisely because stocks are so risky, investors demand these higher returns. Otherwise, everyone would own bonds, which are simply loan contracts. You loan your money to a company or a government, and they pay back with well-described terms. Stocks are ownership in businesses, and the upside for investors comes from the profitability and growth of those businesses. But there are no guarantees. Even a well-diversified stock portfolio can lose half of its value in any year. History shows numerous plunges. It's going to happen again in your lifetime. The stock market doesn't care whether you've been invested for 1 year, 10 years, or 40 years. This is the volatility of the stock market. This is the reason that returns of stocks are so much greater than the return of bonds. Risk and return always go hand in hand when investing. But that risk isn't apparent in this chart. Look close and see if you can make out the Great Depression or the recent crash in 2008. Charts like this one are very common. This means the 1-year return in this data set had a distribution where the average return was about 10%, and the range of outcomes varied from up 53% to down 37% for the years examined. This chart seems to promote owning stocks for their greater return if you can own them for 15, 20 or more years. That time erases risk, which it does not. If you look at probability without regard to consequence, then there's some truth to this. A diversified portfolio of stocks does become progressively more likely to do better than risk-free investments. But intuitively, you know that in any upcoming day, week, or even year, stocks will be riskier, far riskier than short-term U.S. bonds. What's missing on this chart is the uncertainty of future returns. Unlike bonds, there's no predestined rate of return with stocks. The risk is the possibility that, in the long run, stocks returns will be terrible. You want to know, what are the chances of meeting my goals, which each have a dollar amount and dates associated with them? Do stocks become safer with time? No. Uncertainty increases with time. What you cannot see from this chart is that the variability of final value increases the longer that you hold the stocks. Predicting the future value of your stock portfolio is much like predicting the path of a hurricane. Uncertainty increases with time. John Nordstedt shows this visually in a compelling article by representing the S&P 500 returns as a normal distribution. I'll explain here. Stock returns vary widely, but they do have an average value. And 2/3 of the return are within one standard deviation of that. So let's use that and look at the possible end values of investing $1,000 over time horizons ranging from 1 to 40 years. If we naively believed that our money would simply grow at the average rate of return, it would look like this red line. 1/3 of the time, the returns are in this range below, and your money grows slower. 1/3 of the time, the returns are in this range above, and your money grows faster. But if we include the distribution of annual returns, we see spectacular uncertainty. His report says, for example, at 40 years, the chart shows only a 2 in 3 chance that the ending value will be somewhere between $14,000 and $166,000. This is an enormous range of possible outcomes. There is even a 1 in 6 chance that you'll end up higher. And that's the miracle of compound interest. But that comes with risk, because there's also a 1 in 6 chance that you'll end up somewhere near the bottom. Now this chart is revealing, because for an investor concerned with the value of his portfolio at the end of a period of time, it is the total return that matters, not the annualized return. To recap, stock returns are high because they are risky. Stocks are just as risky tomorrow, whether you've owned them 1 year or 10, if measured by volatility. Short-term volatility may not be a concern to long-term investors with a safety net, but they certainly are for individuals with upcoming spending goals. The range of total return increases over time. Has this made sense to you so far? Then test yourself and see whether you can still be fooled by statistics. In this animation, you can see how the U.S. stock market returns have trended when we look at 1, 5, 10, and 20-year rolling periods. This one purportedly isn't missing any key years and has removed inflation, so that's good. Taking a 1-year view, we see lots of red. There were plenty of years in which the market was down. As we take longer and longer time period, from 5 to 10 to 20 years, the range of possibilities narrows, and the chance of losing money diminishes. Or does it? By the last line, where each of these green lines represents a 20-year period, you won't see any more flashes of red. Their message is the U.S. stock market has never lost money over any 20-year period. Okay, tell the truth. Does that not scream out to you that the stock market becomes safer in the long run? What we are watching here is, once again, merely a demonstration that the stocks produce a superior average return in comparison to safer investments. This is what we've seen before, and that's the way it should be, because higher return compensates investors for taking the added risk. But this does not mean that the stocks become less risky over long time horizons. The risk is that the stock market might be down when you need to pull your money out. Professor Zvi Bodhi put the nail in the coffin of the stocks become safer with time fallacy with his proof using option pricing. This is a challenging concept, but important to understand. Let's hear how they answer some common questions. If the goal is lifelong happiness, then we need to be able to spend money today as well as accumulate enough cash for potentially long retirement. Isn't the probability of accumulating more wealth greater using stocks than it is with risk-free bonds? Correct. But it would be an error not to consider consequences. For instance, you would probably also accumulate more wealth if you didn't pay fire insurance for your house. Unlikely events that are highly consequential are perfect for insurance. This question, though, is essentially asking whether you could save less by investing in stocks. Maybe. But choosing to invest that in risky assets for a better return could have disappointing outcomes. Would you play Powerball with next month's rent or grocery money? We saw in episode 2 the importance of saving, which means setting aside current income for future spending. Lifelong happiness comes from smoothing spending. It doesn't require that you live like a Spartan today and defer happiness until tomorrow. The practical way to do that, writes Dr. Bodhi, is to separate your goals into needs and wants. Lock down the income required for your essential needs and important goals by matching them with safe investments. Keep your risky investments allocated to your wants and wishes that you could live without if chance works against you. You saw an example of Ed doing that back in our first episode. He preserved his wealth investing in I-bonds and TIPS to cover his retirement needs. Specifically, he used his I-bonds to delay his Social Security benefit to age 70 and at that time will use his tips to purchase an annuity to get lifelong income for his wants. He has the rest of his money in stock index funds. Ed was an example of somebody retiring at age 65, and he got there by saving aggressively and investing conservatively his whole career. But some people have both the ability and the willingness to take risk, which brings us to our next question. What about stocks for young people? Here, Professor Bodie answers that age does matter, but not because of the commonly mistaken idea that the stock market becomes safer over long holding periods. Rather, younger people have a longer time horizon to build wealth through work. He explains that with a simple life cycle model. All your future earning power starts high and gets depleted by the time you retire. What you save for future spending becomes accumulated wealth. Your total wealth at all times is the sum of your human capital and your accumulated savings. So you can see that if their accumulated savings is invested in risky assets, it's only a tiny fraction of their total wealth when they are young. The consequences of loss are small. But if there is uncertainty about your future earnings capacity or you're near the end of your earning years, the consequences of loss are hard to recover from. Author William Bernstein warns against staying invested in stocks after you've met your goal, asking, when you've won the game, why keep playing it? He goes on and says the risks for a retired person can be nuclear level toxic. Which brings us to the next good question. How should we allocate between stocks and bonds? John Bogle gave us an easy to remember starting point. Own your age in bonds. It's memorable and therefore useful. It is a starting point until you have created a workable plan for yourself. This has its limitations, but it does reduce your exposure to the stock market as your future earning potential decreases. Adjust that to fit your situation. Then try to stay on track by focusing the investment of new money you save. Choosing between risky and safe assets is a goal-by-goal decision. Prioritize your goals. This makes every situation different. Beyond the young with promising careers, other people that can accept stock market risk might be high net worth individuals, but depending on their lifestyles. It's really not age that needs to drive this, but rather considering both the probability and consequences of market drops. How much do you stand to lose? How severe would be that loss? Your spending goals have fixed dates and dollar amounts. You should never put at risk what you cannot afford to lose. Some more examples might clarify this. This 35-year-old couple is just entering their prime earning year, secure jobs, and can afford to take risk in an investment portfolio for their retirement 30 years away. Meanwhile, they have other important goals they don't want to risk in the stock market. This couple started late. They are tempted to take stock market risk to catch up, but they remember 2008 and now 2020 and feel like that could happen at any time. So they are focused on building a safe floor of income that pays for their kids' eminent college educations. Here's our example, Ed again. Same example we've been following all along. He set himself up to be completely worry-free with delayed Social Security and an annuity to eliminate the risk of outliving his money. And finally, this couple is retired, no kids, and all their essential needs are met, plus more than enough for both their retirement needs and wants. Their investments are intended for charitable organizations. One more topic while we are getting oriented. How risky are bonds? This next question asks, if stock market returns will dominate, why own bonds? Bonds play two roles. First, they can guarantee certainty for meeting near-term and essential needs. Second, their stability provides ballast if you have additional risky assets. This is valuable if it prevents you from panic selling, which is all too common when the market drops. A simple bond is a commitment to a series of payments like this. If you loan your money to somebody as a bond, somebody with high credit rating, the bonds are a high certainty contract. They are a promise to make regular interest payments and then to pay you back on a maturity date. Are individual bonds, CDs, and bond ladders safer than bond funds? This is a great question because we're talking about the same thing. Bond ladders and bond funds are nothing more than collections of bonds. But the essence of this question has to do with the risk of getting less by selling early. When new bonds are issued with higher interest rates, then previous bonds are temporarily worth less. Say yesterday you bought a $1,000 bond yielding 2%, and today you bought another one, but the interest rate is now higher, and the same bond yields 2.1%. Obviously, the second bond is going to be worth more to you because you earn more interest every month. They're both going to pay you $1,000 back on the day they mature. Conversely, the value of a bond would rise if interest rates fell. Bank CDs work the same way, but it's less obvious because their current value to you is not posted. If the bank suddenly drops its interest rates by 1% on their 5-year CDs, you'd be delighted if you had already purchased it. In this picture, the interest rate falls 1% every year. Notice that the impact diminishes as the CD approaches maturity. A bond price goes in the opposite direction as interest rates, like a teeter-totter. The sensitivity of a bond to interest rate changes increases with duration. You can compare the sensitivity for any bond by looking up its average duration. When we talk about risk-free bonds, we are talking about both keeping up with inflation and eliminating the interest rate risk. Holding any bond to maturity will eliminate interest rate sensitivity. TIPS bonds additionally eliminate inflation uncertainty. If you can match a TIPS bond maturity with the dates you expect to spend it, then it gets to be in the safest column. Risk-free, zero default risk, and zero inflation risk. A Series I savings bond, an I bond, is a special kind of bond that you can only own with an online account with the U.S. Treasury. It's called treasurydirect.gov. The upside of I bonds is their flexibility and inflation protection. The downside is that they must be held in this special account, cannot be used in tax-advantaged retirement accounts, and have an annual purchase limit. This picture shows investments that lock down money you'll need for your highest priority goals. This usually includes your essential needs for retirement. It is only when a bond is sold before maturity that current interest rates will cause it to be worth more or less. Default or credit risk can be eliminated by sticking with the highest quality bonds. Inflation risk can be eliminated by choosing inflation-indexed bonds. Bottom line, the uncertainty of bonds is far less than the uncertainty associated with the stock market. Investment risk and return go hand in hand. Diversification. This topic is so important that we'll devote an entire episode to it. In a nutshell, it's a way to reduce the uncertainty for every level of risk, but it's a far cry from eliminating stock market risk. Next, in episode 4, I'll show you the smart way to incorporate stock market risk into your portfolio. Let's do that now. Find other tips and useful resources at financinglife.org.